In the late 1932, the world stood on the edge of a new war. Europe trembled under growing political tension. Nations were rearming at an unprecedented pace, and the oceans once again became a stage for rivalry and ambition. It was in this climate that Germany, determined to reclaim its lost maritime power after the First World War, began the creation of a ship meant to symbolize its resurgence, a battleship so formidable that it would come to be seen as invincible. This was the beginning of the story of the Bismarck, the ship that no one believed could ever be sunk. The design of the battleship began in 1934 under the strictest secrecy. Officially, Germany was still bound by the Treaty of Versailles, which forbade the construction of heavy warships. But the new leadership no longer considered those restrictions binding. German engineers were ordered to design a vessel that could stand against any contemporary British battleship, the standard by which all naval power was measured. It had to be faster, stronger, and more heavily armed than anything afloat. The Bismarck became the pinnacle of German naval engineering. It measured nearly 250 meters in length, with a full displacement exceeding 50,000 tons. Its main armor belt reached 320 millimeters in thickness, making it nearly impervious to most shells at long range. The main armament, 8 380mm guns housed in 4 twin turrets, could fire shells weighing close to a metric ton over a distance of 35 kilometers. These were complemented by numerous secondary and anti-aircraft batteries. The power plant drove the ship at speeds exceeding 30 knots, making it one of the fastest battleships in the world. Construction began on the 1st of July, 1936, at the Blohm & Voss shipyard in Hamburg. Every part of the process was carried out with precision. The Bismarck embodied both technological mastery and national pride. When the ship was launched on the 14th of February 1939, thousands gathered along the banks of the River Elbe to witness the spectacle. The ceremony was elaborate, carefully orchestrated, and symbolic. The ship was christened by the granddaughter of Otto von Bismarck, the man whose name it would bear. From that moment, the Bismarck was more than a machine. It became a national emblem, a floating monument to German ambition. Sea trials lasted for more than a year. Every system was tested in various conditions. Sailors who served aboard remarked on the precision of its design, the efficiency of its machinery, and the relative comfort of life on board compared to older ships. Yet the Bismarck was not merely a vessel of war, it was a statement of intent, a message to the world that Germany had returned to the seas. Its very presence was meant to project power and inspire fear. By the time the Second World War erupted, the Bismarck was technically complete, though its operational deployment was delayed. It would not see action until 1941, when the war had already engulfed most of Europe. Germany needed a way to break the British naval blockade and disrupt supply lines crossing the Atlantic. Heavy surface ships were to be used to strike Allied convoys. The Bismarck was chosen as the centerpiece of this strategy. The ship's crew numbered about 2,200 officers, engineers, gunners, radiomen, and sailors. All had been carefully selected. The commanding officer was Captain Ernst Lindemann, a disciplined and methodical officer known for his professionalism. Above him stood Admiral Gunther Lütjens, the fleet commander who would make the operational decisions. In March 1941, the Bismarck completed its final Baltic trials. Observers reported that it handled rough seas with remarkable stability, a steel giant seemingly indifferent to wind or wave. The German press celebrated it as a floating fortress and the invincible warrior of the ocean. But beneath the confident headlines lay the cold reality of its purpose. The Bismarck was built for destruction. Its mission was clear: to cripple Britain's maritime lifelines. A successful campaign could threaten the survival of the British Isles by cutting off vital resources. But High Command also understood that the appearance of such a ship in the Atlantic would provoke an immediate and determined response. Britain could not and would not ignore such a threat. By the spring of 1941, everything was ready for the ship's first combat mission. Secrecy surrounded every aspect of the operation. The hull was freshly repainted with special camouflage patterns designed to confuse enemy reconnaissance. On deck, silence prevailed as the crew prepared for the long voyage ahead. Every man knew that this would be more than a test, it would be history in motion. The Bismarck was born as a symbol of invulnerability, a masterpiece of engineering and power. Yet the history of naval warfare had already shown that no ship, no matter how advanced, could ever be truly unsinkable. For now, however, it stood as a new colossus upon the waves, a vessel that seemed to defy fate itself. The world watched as the Bismarck prepared to sail, unaware that its first mission would also be its last. By May 1941, the Bismarck was ready for war. The ship that had long been a symbol of potential now stood poised to act. Its mission, codenamed Operation Rheinübung, was simple in design but monumental in risk: to break into the Atlantic, hunt Allied convoys, and strike at the heart of Britain's supply routes. Together with the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, the Bismarck would challenge the Royal Navy's control of the seas. On May 18, under the gray skies of the Baltic, the ships slipped quietly out of Gotenhafen. The departure was secret. Only a few within the German Naval Command knew the full details. Every precaution was taken to conceal their movements from British reconnaissance aircraft. The two ships steamed north through the Danish Straits, escorted briefly by smaller vessels before entering the open waters of the North Sea. The Bismarck was in peak condition. Its engines ran flawlessly, and its guns had been calibrated to perfection. Admiral Günther Lütjens, commanding the operation, maintained strict radio silence. He knew that the Royal Navy's network of patrols and listening stations was extensive. Any signal could betray their position. The atmosphere aboard was tense, but disciplined. The crew worked with mechanical precision, aware that they were part of something extraordinary. On May 20, while passing near the coast of Norway, the Bismarck was sighted by a neutral observer and soon reported to the British. Within hours, the Admiralty knew that Germany's most powerful warship had entered the North Atlantic. The reaction was immediate and absolute. Britain's fleet was mobilized. Battleships, cruisers, and aircraft carriers left their ports in pursuit. The order was simple: find the Bismarck and destroy it. By May 23, the German task force had reached the icy waters of the Denmark Strait, between Greenland and Iceland. The fog was dense, the sea rough. Visibility was poor, perfect conditions for evasion. Yet the British were already waiting. Two heavy cruisers, Suffolk and Norfolk, patrolled the area using radar, a technology still new and limited, but sufficient to detect the enemy. Late that evening, the Bismarck appeared briefly on their screens. The chase had begun. Admiral Lütjens ordered a sharp course change to shake off the shadowing cruisers, but the British maintained contact. Through the night, both sides maneuvered across the cold, dark waters. The German ships tried to break into the Atlantic. The British sought to block them until reinforcements arrived. By dawn, the stage was set for a confrontation that would enter naval legend. At dawn, on May 24, the Bismarck and Prinz Eugen encountered the British battlecruiser Hood and the new battleship Prince of Wales. The engagement lasted barely 10 minutes, but left an indelible mark on history. From a distance of about 15 kilometers, the ships exchanged salvos across the Gray Sea. Suddenly, one of Bismarck's shells struck Hood near her ammunition magazines. A blinding explosion tore through the vessel. In moments, the pride of the Royal Navy split in two and vanished beneath the waves. Only 3 of her crew survived. For Germany, it was a staggering victory. The Bismarck had destroyed Britain's most famous warship in a single strike. Yet the triumph was short-lived. During the battle, the Bismarck herself had taken damage. A British shell had punctured a fuel tank, causing a slow but steady leak of oil. The ship could still fight, but its range was now severely limited. Admiral Lütjens faced a grim decision. He could either continue the mission into the Atlantic or head for occupied France for repairs. He chose the latter, setting course for the French port of Saint-Nazaire. The Prinz Eugen was ordered to proceed independently and continue raiding. Alone now, the Bismarck began her desperate run south, pursued by an entire fleet. For the British, the loss of Hood was a national shock. The Royal Navy, humiliated in the North Atlantic, vowed revenge. The First Sea Lord himself declared that every available ship was to hunt down the Bismarck. Battleships, cruisers, and aircraft carriers were redirected. Submarines and patrol aircraft joined the search. In the Atlantic, the largest naval pursuit of the war had begun. As night fell on May 25, the Bismarck moved west, hoping to lose her pursuers in the vast ocean. The damage was contained, the crew exhausted but determined. Yet the oil slick trailing behind her stretched for miles, a dark, visible scar upon the water, marking her path for those who hunted her. The world now watched the unfolding drama. The unsinkable ship had struck with devastating power, but in doing so, had sealed her fate. The hunter was becoming the hunted. After the battle in the Denmark Strait, the Bismarck steamed southward alone. Behind her stretched a dark trail of oil that betrayed her course, while ahead lay the Atlantic vast, cold, and filled with enemies. The ship had survived, but the damage was serious. The hit to her fuel system meant she could not reach distant waters or return safely to Germany. Admiral Lutyens decided to head for France, hoping to find safety under German air cover. The British Admiralty, shocked by the loss of Hood, reacted with unmatched determination. Within hours, nearly every available vessel in the Atlantic was ordered to find the Bismarck. The battleships King George V, Rodney, Revenge, the carrier Ark Royal, and numerous cruisers and destroyers joined the chase. The Royal Navy's goal was clear. The German battleship must not reach port. For 2 days, the Bismarck maneuvered skillfully, disappearing from radar and reconnaissance aircraft. Her crew worked tirelessly to contain the oil leak, repair communication lines, and keep engines running at maximum capacity. The sea was rough, winds strong, and visibility low, elements that temporarily favored escape. On May 26, a British reconnaissance aircraft finally spotted the Bismarck about 700 miles west of Brest. The news electrified the fleet. The aircraft carrier Ark Royal launched its Swordfish torpedo planes, slow, fabric-covered biplanes from another era, yet now the last hope of stopping the German giant. As the Swordfish approached in heavy weather, the Bismarck opened fire. Explosions lit the dark sky. Water erupted around the planes. But the attack continued. One torpedo struck the stern of the ship. It did not explode deep inside the hull, but it achieved something far worse. It jammed the rudder. The Bismarck could no longer steer properly. The ship began to turn in wide, uncontrollable circles. For the crew, the realization was devastating. Damage teams tried desperately to repair the steering gear, but access was limited. Divers risked their lives in the stormy water, working under the hull, but nothing could be done. The battleship that had once been unstoppable was now crippled, trapped in the Atlantic, and surrounded by enemies closing in from all sides. Through the night, the Bismarck fought the sea as much as her pursuers. The crew prepared for battle, cleaning guns, securing ammunition, and waiting for dawn. Radio messages sent to German command grew increasingly desperate. Air support was promised, but never arrived. By early morning on May 27, British warships had converged. The battleships Rodney and King George V moved into position. In the gray light of dawn, the Bismarck appeared on the horizon, wounded but defiant. The final battle was about to begin. The Royal Navy had spent days scouring the ocean to reach this moment. Now, with the Bismarck unable to maneuver, they closed the distance and prepared to end the chase. For the men aboard the German ship, there was no escape left, only the cold certainty of what was to come. The hunt was over. The reckoning was about to begin. At dawn on the 27th of May, 1941, the Bismarck awaited her end in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The night had been long and cold. Heavy rain squalls passed over the crippled battleship as she drifted helplessly, her rudder jammed, her engine still turning but unable to change course. Around her, the sea stretched in all directions, gray, vast, indifferent. On the horizon, the silhouettes of British warships were approaching. After days of relentless pursuit, the Royal Navy had closed the trap. The final confrontation began shortly before 9 in the morning. The battleships Rodney and King George V advanced in line, flanked by cruisers and destroyers. When they reached firing range, the sea erupted. At 8:47, Rodney fired the first salvo. A moment later, King George V joined in, and heavy shells began falling around the German battleship. The Bismarck replied immediately, her forward turrets unleashing their remaining power in measured, disciplined volleys. The thunder of artillery rolled across the waves. For a brief time, the fight seemed even. Shells from the Bismarck straddled Rodney, throwing up massive columns of water, and observers on both sides felt the weight of history pressing down on the moment. But the advantage belonged to the British. Their ships were mobile and coordinated. The Bismarck could only turn slowly in circles, unable to aim her guns effectively. Within minutes, British fire began to tell. At 9:02, a shell from Rodney struck the forward superstructure of the Bismarck, destroying the bridge and killing most of the command staff. Communication lines failed, and the ship's control fell to isolated officers deep inside the hull. Despite the chaos, the crew continued to serve their guns with mechanical precision. The secondary batteries fired at the approaching destroyers, while anti-aircraft crews, with nothing left to shoot at, joined damage control teams, hauling hoses and extinguishing fires. The storm of shells intensified. Each hit tore away armor, shattered bulkheads, and sent fragments through compartments crowded with men. Smoke poured from burning fuel lines, and flames licked across the wrecked deck. Still, the ship refused to die. Even as her turrets were smashed one by one, the Bismarck kept returning fire. It was an act of endurance rather than hope. By 9:30, the Bismarck was a ruined fortress. Her forward guns were silent, her aft turrets jammed, her radar and rangefinders gone. Admiral Lutyens and Captain Lindemann were both dead, but the flags still flew from the stern. The British gunners continued to fire, reducing the once proud battleship to twisted metal. The sea was littered with debris, splintered steel, lifeboats, and fragments of armor. At last, around 10, the British ships ceased fire. They had expended much of their ammunition. The Bismarck was motionless, burning from bow to stern, but still afloat. To end the ordeal, the destroyer Dorsetshire closed in and launched torpedoes. 3 struck home. The great ship shuddered. Slowly, she began to list to port. At 10:39, the Bismarck rolled over completely, her stern rising high above the waves. A final explosion, perhaps, from internal charges set by her surviving engineers to prevent capture marked her death. Then she slipped beneath the surface, swallowed by the deep Atlantic, leaving only scattered wreckage and oil on the waves. Out of more than 2,200 men aboard, only 110 were pulled from the water by British ships before worsening weather and the fear of submarines forced the rescuers to leave. Hours later, German aircraft arrived, finding nothing but debris. News of the sinking spread quickly across Europe. In Britain, it was hailed as justice for the loss of Hood, a triumph of persistence and coordination. In Germany, it was received with disbelief and mourning. The unsinkable battleship had been destroyed less than 9 days after her first mission began. The end of the Bismarck marked a turning point in naval history. It demonstrated that even the most powerful battleships were no longer invincible in the age of air power, radar, and long-range coordination. The future belonged to aircraft carriers and submarines, not armored giants. Yet the Bismarck left behind more than wreckage. She became a legend, a symbol of engineering brilliance and tragic destiny. Today, resting nearly 5,000 meters beneath the surface, the ship remains preserved by the cold Atlantic, a silent monument to the men who built her, fought aboard her, and perished with her. The story of the Bismarck endures, not as a tale of victory or defeat, but as a reminder of human ambition against the vast, unyielding power of the sea.